The next violent crime we're going to discuss is homicide. Most American jurisdictions divide homicide into two major categories, murder and manslaughter. And then each of these categories is divided to reflect differences in available punishments. There's murder in the first degree, murder in the second degree. Murder in the first degree, the harshest punishment is execution. Murder in the second degree, life without the possibility of parole is the harshest sentence. There's no execution involved in murder in the second degree. Then we have manslaughter, which is viewed as a less serious killing, and it's divided into voluntary and involuntary. So what is the difference? The determinant factor relative to these crimes is the actor's state of mind or intent. In modern times, criminal homicide is defined by elements that are put forth in a statute, but we're going to discuss the common law definitions here. So murder 1 and murder 2. Under the common law, murder in the first degree was defined as killing of a human being with malice aforethought, which means intentionally pre-planned, premeditated, deliberate killing. So you have a killing of a human being. But then the question was, what is a human being? It's kind of self-evident, isn't it? Under the common law, born alive. So if you kill a human being, that person must be alive at the time of the killing. So there was a question raised regarding the fetus. There was a case in the 1970s. A man purposely kicked his former wife, whom he knew was pregnant, in the stomach, threatening to stomp it out of her. And the fetus died, and he was charged with homicide. And that did not stand because it was deemed under the law that a fetus was not a human being. In 1984, there was a case. A woman delivered her baby into a toilet bowl where it drowned. The woman was charged with murder. The woman testified that the baby did not cry and that she did not tie its umbilical cord. And the question was whether the child was a human being. And the court said, yes, the fetus became a human being after the child passed through the birth canal and took a breath. It is irrelevant that the baby may have had been dead by the time the process was finished. So in response to cases like this, legislators created or amended statutes to broaden the definition of human being. California was the first of many states, and then the federal government that considered an embryo a fetus from the time of conception. Others determine that a fetus is formed when the child is able to move within the womb. Few states don't recognize a fetus as a victim, and few states say that fetus is a victim once it is viable and can survive outside the womb. And of course, abortion is not included in this definition, and that's not a form of murder under the law. So to have murder 1 under common law, it must be planned and deliberate, and it must be a human being, somebody who's born alive under those definitions that I gave. Planning does not have to be long. Just have to, you just got into an argument with a patron at a bar, you leave, you drive home, 10 minutes, it's 10 minutes away. On your way there, you're mad, you keep thinking about what happened. You get home, you're still stewing about it, you're pacing around the house, you're thinking about it, this person made you mad. You go to your drawer, you grab your gun, you return to the bar, and you wait in the car for the patron to come out. The patron comes out, you follow them to the car, and you shoot them, and they die. That's premeditated. Well, it didn't take days, didn't take weeks, short period of time. It's still deliberate and planned. That's first-degree murder. Second-degree murder is kind of the catch-all. If a killing was murder, but it wasn't premeditated, it's in the second degree. Extreme recklessness or wanton disregard conduct or a desire to inflict serious harm may not necessarily plan to kill someone, but the intent is to inflict serious harm and the person dies from the harm. It would be murder too. Developed was a killing if one, this was developed as a killing if one didn't intend to kill, but nevertheless acted in a way that they knew created a high risk of death and not particularly caring about it. For example, shooting a gun into a crowded train, killing people. You know the risk of shooting a gun into a crowded train, but you do it anyway. It's said that they have acted with a depraved heart or deliberate indifference. That's the terminology used in the book, deliberate indifference. Deliberate indifference murder. It's murder 2, held liable for the death of another despite no intent to do so if exhibited deliberate indifference to the danger his actions might cause, knows or disregards or ignores the excessive risk to another's safety. There's a good example in the book with the dog owner, real case. But how about this for an example? Creating a great risk of death. Defendant, who's a juvenile, puts a bullet in a 5-chamber gun. According to his testimony, he did not expect the gun to discharge until the 5th pull of the trigger. He then pretended to play Russian roulette with Billy, his 13-year-old friend. There was no evidence that he spun the chamber, but on the 3rd pull, the trigger of the gun fired, killing Billy. And the juvenile's charged with murder. Well, I didn't intend to shoot him. I thought it would go off on I didn't anticipate that was going to go off on round 5. What are the chances of a gun firing on the 3rd pull? He pulled it twice, nothing. 3rd, 33%. Assuming no spinning. Did he create that risk? Was it consciously disregarded? There was no reason to create this risk at all. So the chances of his claims are irrelevant. When you create a risk, and you don't have to create a risk, then it's going to be considered murder 2, deliberate indifference. The other form of murder is felony murder. What is it? Any death occurring during the course of a felony or an attempted felony is murder. And that felony could be violent crime such as robbery, which we'll get to, or a nonviolent crime such as a petty theft. The U.S. is the only country that recognizes this law, by the way, felony murder. Defendant charged with murder if, let's say, they go in to rob a bank. They have a gun. Things get out of hand. A gun guard comes running out and the defendant shoots, or the guard shoots, the defendant shoots back, kills the guard. That's murder. He may not have intended murder, but it's going to be murder because he's committing the felony of a robbery, and the murder happened during the course of committing a felony. So murder 1, murder 2, and felony murder. And then we have our manslaughter category. What is manslaughter? It's an unlawful homicide without malice or murder intent, as we'll call it for number 2. It's not premeditated or deliberate for 1, and it doesn't fit into our felony murder category. So what is the difference between murder and manslaughter? The criminal mind, the intent. There's 2 categories, voluntary and involuntary. Voluntary manslaughter is a killing that is done on a sudden or in the heat of passion after adequate provocation. There has to be something that provokes it. The voluntary or acting on your own volition manslaughter is indeed murder because you're kind of reacting or doing the act. But because the defendant kills in such a state of mind or in frenzy, that's brought on about a sudden provocation at a time when maybe they say reason is dethroned. So there's no mental component. It's legally adequate provocation is outside the scope of what we're talking about in this class. I just want to make sure you know the difference between our murders and our manslaughters and our involuntary and our voluntary. So when you hear voluntary, somebody's acting. They are voluntary doing the act. They're just not in the right state of, they're acting by something that has provoked them, and it causes such a heat of passion or in a frenzy. And the example that is always used to describe this is a spouse come home early from work and they find the other spouse in bed with the next door neighbor. That is said to be legally adequate provocation, in that if that person, that spouse who came in and saw them, then picks up a gun and shoots them both, could be considered voluntary manslaughter. Not a lot of examples fall under this realm, but you have to decide what was the provocation. And then involuntary manslaughter is you see this a lot with drinking and driving cases. We call it negligently killing. Somebody knows the risk of doing something, but they do it anyway. And while they did not intend to kill somebody, somebody's killed. So getting in a vehicle after you've been drinking, and that is not a good move to make. It's very negligent to make that kind of move while you can be arrested, certainly for drinking and driving. If you luck out and don't get stopped for that, and you're driving down the road and swerve into the path of another car or run a red light or a stop sign, and you hit a vehicle and you kill somebody in the other vehicle, that would be deemed involuntary manslaughter. While you didn't intend to kill somebody, the act of being negligent or reckless, some would say, getting behind the wheel after drinking, is enough to charge and be convicted of involuntary manslaughter. So those are our homicide statutes and law. So what's the nature and extent of murder or homicide? According to the Uniform Crime Report, since 1991, the murder rate has been declining. The report also tells us that murder tends to be an urban crime, happening more in larger cities. Victims and offenders tend to be males. About half of murder victims are African Americans. About 1/3 of victims and half of the offenders tend to be under the age of 25. And lastly, our research shows that people arrested for homicide tend to have long criminal careers. Very few people begin a criminal career by killing somebody. So relationships are involved with murder. Most murders are expressive in nature, meaning they're motivated by anger or rage, and it's mostly involving someone they know in some capacity. They may not know them well, but they know them. Homicides involving strangers is typically the result when the offender is involved in committing another crime, such as a robbery, like the bank robbery example that I gave with the guard being killed. Males are more likely to kill others with similar social standing, and doing so in public, while women are likely to kill family members in a more private setting. So what forms do these murderous relations take? We have a few of those. We have the intimate partner murder. 40% of female homicide incidences involve killing a male partner. Generally, it is fueled by years of abuse. There's no way out, so they kill their partner. In these instances, women are less likely to get the death penalty as a punishment. And I will also take a moment to note that most women are allowed to use the defense, or will use the defense of battered woman syndrome defense, that they have just been abused over the years and they just snap and they shoot the predator or the aggressor. And what happens is it leads to a conviction of a lesser charge, like manslaughter. Under these circumstances, it is usually the woman's first violent offense. As I said a moment ago, most of the time they're criminal career offenders, and shooting someone is not a first offense. For women, it generally is, because they're usually killing a family member, and most of the time it's the result of an abusive relationship. On the other hand, 10% of all murders committed by men involve a female partner, so it's a lot less. Men who do kill a female partner, there's also usually been a long history of violence, and that's the end result. It may have not been an intentional murder, but that's what happens as the violence gets worse and worse over time. Another instance involving intimate partner murder is when mates find themselves in a love triangle. Women tend to kill out of jealousy, so they'll try and kill the partner, while men are more likely to kill the male rival. The other relationship, murderous relationship, another one is acquaintance murders. Most murders occur among people who know each other in some way, like I said earlier, and that's regardless of how slight. And the killing will appear on its surface to anyone looking at it as senseless. So imagine a drug addict who's carrying a gun meets a drug dealer on a dark street corner surrounded by several people. The drug dealer tells the addict the price of the narcotic has changed, and an argument ensues. They have a heated exchange. The addict pulls out a weapon and points it at the dealer. The dealer reacts by pulling his own weapon and shooting and killing the addict. This could easily be, this example could easily be two men fighting in a bar over a woman. And they go out into the parking lot and one ends up killing the other. This is an example of a victim, the addict, we'll take the addict example, addict, who precipitated or contributed to their victimization during a situated transaction where the location is to purchase illegal narcotics, and is murdered by the offender, their narcotics dealer. This scenario describes a situated transaction in Homicides, which was developed by Dr. David Luckenbill. He's a researcher and a sociologist, and he found that many homicides follow a sequential pattern. The victim makes what offender considers an offensive move, like hits on his girlfriend. The offender typically retaliates verbally or physically, shoves him away, tells him to get off, F off. An agreement to end things violently is then forged with the victim's provocative response. You want to take it outside? And then a battle ensues, leaving the victim dead. They're out in the parking lot. Victim draws a gun, offender draws the gun, and the offender is successful. So, acquaintance murderers. Stranger murders, they make up 20% of all murders, generally occur during the commission of another crime, like robbery. Some are acts of urban violence, like gang drive-bys, and an innocent person is hit. Some are fueled by hate. We're going to talk about hate crimes in a little bit. This is when a person kills another because of the victim's race, gender, or ethnicity or class. They don't know who they are. They just pick a victim at random based on race, gender, ethnicity, class, and murders them. Sexually based murders. Not a lot is known about sexually motivated killers, but the murders can take various forms. There's the love triangle that I discussed a moment ago with intimate partner murder. There's lust, where they're driven by sexual fantasies. There's vengeance, a victim of sexual violence or assault, or someone on their behalf seeks out and kills the offender or predator. Domestic disputes. Rape or sexual offender tries to overcome his or her victim's resistance and in the end ends up killing them as a result. Self-defense. The victim of a rape or sexual assault defends themselves against the attacker killing them. So those are different forms of sexually based murders. School murders. Murderers. Violence in school is common, unfortunately, today. On average, 25 students are killed each year at school or on their way to school or from school. School shootings are usually done by white males, either before school starts, the lunch period, or at the end of the day. Most times, a note or a threat of violence is left before violence happens, and a lot of times the offender has told somebody or suggested to somebody that something's going to happen. And the shooters are more likely to have expressed some type of suicidal behavior, and in their background they have been bullied. Those are the types, these 1, 2, 3, 4, 5, 6, these 6 types of murderous relationships. These types of murderous relationships are the relationships that describe various murders that take place. What we're going to turn to is specific killers themselves, those who engage in serial killing, those who engage in mass murders, and those who engage in spree killings. We're going to talk about what constitutes each type, what the difference is among them, and what type of person actually commits these murders. And before I step away from the school murderers, consider James Austin Hancock, the book on page 340. He was 14 when he took a handgun to school and shot his classmates. Thankfully, no one died. But consider his story. There's a link on Moodle. It's also in the book. Kind of gives a little bit more background about this young man outside. It gives you a little bit more of a snapshot than the school murders that I just described, the school murderer that I just described, and the one that's detailed in the book. You may, at least I did, I felt a little sorry for the young man, and apparently a lot of his victims did too. So take a look at that. Next topic: serial killers, mass murderers, and spree killers. Serial killers, that's up next on our radar here. Serial murder is a criminal homicide that involves the killing of 3 or more persons in 3 or more killings or separate events. Contrary to what some commonly held beliefs are, the vast majority of serial killers are not legally insane or medically psychotic. They are more cruel than crazy, according to Fox and Levin, the experts on serial killers. Their crimes might be sickening, but their minds are not necessarily sick. Many serial killers are diagnosed as sociopaths, a term for those with antisocial personalities. Because they lack a conscious, sociopaths do not consider the need or basic humanity of others in their decision-making or in their view of the world. They do not see themselves as being bound by conventional rules or by the expectations of others. Sociopaths view other people as tools to be manipulated for the purpose of maximizing their personal pleasure, according to Fox and Levin. However, many sociopaths are neither serial killers nor involve violent crimes, even though they might lie, cheat, and steal. So, Fox and Levin have classified serial murderers as thrill-motivated killers, mission-oriented killers, and expedience-directed serial killers. Let's go through each one of these. So, thrill seekers. The thrill seeker is the sexual, sadistic, and dominance killer. They find killing enjoyable and derive psychological pleasure from killing. Mission-oriented killer, not as common, and generally have either a reformist or a visionary orientation. The reformists want to rid the world of evil, and visionaries hear voices commanding them to do certain activities. Visionary killers are quite rare, and they tend to be generally psychotic. Expedience-oriented killers are driven by profit or protection. Profit-driven killers may kill for financial or material gain, and the protection-oriented killers commit murder to mask other crimes, like robbery. Female serial killers, while not as many as male, the vast majority of serial killers are male. There have been female serial killers, and the patterns of their activities are sometimes distinct from those of the males. Women tend to select victims among people they know. The victims are generally vulnerable, like children or elderly, and they are usually motivated by financial gain, getting an inheritance out of it. A notorious female serial killer was Eileen Wones. She was a prostitute that killed her Johns. She lives in Florida. She was ultimately sentenced to death for her killings, and she was executed, one of the few women who've been executed. Serial killers in general, between their killings, what happens is they return to their normal lifestyle. And number one, it makes them hard to apprehend, but once they are apprehended, it's a shock to everybody, like Ted Bundy. So, mass murderers. This is the illegal killing of 4 or more individuals in a single event or during a short period of time, and it's usually done by one or very few assailants. The book on page 343 lays out a number of mass murderers. You might be familiar with the stories. They've all made headlines. For one, James Holmes, who killed 12 people at the movie theater in Colorado during the opening of the Batman movie, The Dark Knight Rises. Sandy Hook in Connecticut, Adam Lanza killed 20 children, 6 adults. And before he did that, he killed his old mother. 2014 was the Orlando nightclub. Omar Martin killed 49 people. Many others were wounded. Mass murderers tend to surprise their victims because they often attack in everyday locales that are considered safe, and because they erupt spontaneously. They are sometimes described as random, but such events are not random from the perspective of the perpetrator, because they carefully and often plan their attacks. Although they don't occur with great frequency, they cause great concern because they shatter the sense of safety that usually characterizes everyday life. Given the number of mass shootings that have occurred, though, over the past few decades, a number of schools, hospitals, and businesses across the nation started taking steps to deal with such events. There's, open active shooter training, which suggests that it's becoming significantly more frequent than it has been in the past. And Fox and Levin have identified the types of mass murderers based on the crime's motives. Revenge murderers. They represent the largest category of these kinds of killers. They are motivated by revenge against either particular individuals or a group of individuals. There's the love killer, motivated by love. They have a sense of love that is distorted and obsessive. They often commit suicide after they murder. And this is usually in the case of a spouse killing. They may also kill the children too. Mass murderer or profit killers. The profit killers as another mass murderer who kill for profit. They're usually trying to eliminate witnesses in an effort to cover up some other major crime that they've committed. The terrorist killers, they're motivated by terror. They're trying to send a message. Gang shootings are an example of terrorist killers. Even though mass murderers strike the public as senseless, these kind of acts as senseless, and the individual doing them as a crazy person, Levin and Fox contend that most are not madmen and argue that factors such as frustration, isolation, blame, loss, failure, and other external and internal factors contribute to their acts that build up over time, resulting in a violent outburst. Mass murderers select targets that have significance for them, such as coworkers at a site of former employment. They also target specific victims who they choose, so those victims aren't in the wrong place at the wrong time. Mass murderers, unlike serial killers, are usually easy to catch because they barely leave the scene of the crime, usually either killing themselves or staying long enough to get caught or killed by the police. Then we have spree killers. Different from mass murderers because it's not a single outburst of violence. It's different from serial killer in that a spree killer doesn't return to their normal lives between killings. Spree killers engage in a rampage, a rampage, that's what it is, of violence over a period of days or weeks, killing multiple victims. Generally, there is no pattern to the killing, but sometimes a specific group or class is targeted. A big example of that was in 2002 in Washington, D.C., the snipers in Washington, D.C. These killers can be hard to apprehend depending on the care they take at each crime scene. Studies show that most spree killers have various personality disorders, but not a significant mental illness. So that wraps up our murder and homicide discussion. We're going to move on and explore some other interpersonal violent crimes, including hate crimes, robbery, assault, workplace violence, and stalking.